Hello, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer, the board game review show that recently saw that great new World War I movie, 1917. But I can't figure out the title, though. Was that the guy's serial number? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to go ahead and take a look at War Room from Nightingale Games.
They're fighting nation against nation, a battlefield at your command. It's either flourish or starvation. Let's hope your strategy is planned. War room with an answer enemy. Shoot first, then you use diplomacy. War room, be the best that you can be. Fight all through land, air, and sea. War room, fight the whole just because a war room. That's just what an Nazi does. War room, see the whole world from above, just like the Doctor Strange love. War room with an answer enemy. Shoot first, then you use diplomacy. War room, be the best that you can be. Fight all through land, air, and sea. War room, fight the whole world just because a war room. That's just what an Nazi does. War room, see the whole world from above, just like the Doctor Strange love.
In War Room from Nightingale Games, players take on the roles of either the Allied or the Axis powers in World War II. The game can be played in several different scenarios, including a global war scenario, an Eastern Front scenario, a general Europe scenario, and a Pacific scenario. The game board is a giant map of the world. It's a puzzle map that comes with the core game. You can also get the large kind of play mat, which is an even larger, gigantic play mat. The game board, of course, delineates the major powers and their geographic extent as of spring of 1942, roughly. And there are, of course, different sections and territories throughout the board, both on land and sea. Once players decide which country they will get a box that is filled with their various command tokens for naval, air, and land. They will receive a chart that they can keep using pegs. They can keep track of their national income, and they will also receive various territory cards for their faction. Players set up by looking at various command tokens they have and then finding the appropriate units that they can place and stack beneath them. The units in this game, of course, are infantry, which is yellow. You've got tanks, which are green. Artillery, which is blue. You've also got air units, which are fighters are green. Bombers are red. You've got naval units. You've got submarines are yellow. You've got cruisers are blue. Carriers are green. Battleships are red. So you can go ahead and kind of using that color system, it says on the commands exactly what you're going to stack under them and what location they start in. Each location has a number letter designation to tell exactly where it is on the board. The very first thing players do during the game is kind of track their national economy. Now they're going to look at all of the cards that they've got, which are going to indicate what types of resources they have around the world. How much oil they're going to get, how much iron they're going to get, and how many various of the other strategic resources which they have. Now these are represented by colors. Red is oil, blue is iron, and the other strategic resources are yellow. Phase 2 is strategic planning, and players are going to write out their orders. Now, in the core game, they're going to have various pads of paper. With the Jumbo expansion, you're going to have dry erase boards that you can write those orders on. And how you write an order is essentially you say the number of the command. The command sheet has, the 100th, or the 87th, or the first or the second. You're going to write down the number of the command, and then below it you're going to write the space it's moving into. So you could write 100 into J5 just off the top of my head, and that is going to say what the command is and where its final destination is. Now units can move in different ways. Sea units generally move 2. Land units can move 1, but they can move as far as they can along a continuous rail line. Air units can move 2, and then they're going to have a chance to move back 2 at the end of combat. Now also, land units, when they go to sea, they become transports, and they can move two sea zones while they are in transports. However, they are vulnerable, so you don't want to move those along sea unless you've got either air or naval power to cover them. Now also, too, during this phase, every player is going to bid oil. This is going to be turn order. Players have a number of oil they can bid, and whatever you bid, wherever you come in the bid, you lose that oil. So if you bid 3 oil, you will not have 3 oil later to spend on things you need. Players reveal their orders simultaneously, and the first thing you do is figure out your player bid. Figure out your turn order. So the player with the highest turn order goes first, and second, etc., etc. If there's any ties, then that's just kind of randomly figured out. But you go ahead and you put your turn order on the turn order track. Now this is important because things are going to play out simultaneously, but there's still some critical timing issues. The third phase is that movement operations phase, where essentially you are going to give your player board to one of your enemies, somebody from the other faction there. And they are going to read aloud the orders as you have written them. And you then will move your items on the board. You will go ahead and actually move the units from where they are to where you've written them to. If, however, you make any mistakes in your writing, the orders don't go, they hold. It is possible to write multiple orders for the same unit in case something happens and you can't move it in the way you want. The first thing is canceled, you can move it in the second thing. Now, all the players have 9 orders they can issue. They can order issues to 9 different commands around the board. However, the Italians and the Chinese, they can only move 6. Now, also, too, you do have carriers in this game. Unlike in, say, in Axis and Allies, you don't actually land the fighters you produce on carriers, or other carriers just will always spawn one fighter unit. And you can go ahead and, once you move your carrier, you can then move your fighter unit either to the adjacent sea zone or to one adjacent land zone to that sea zone. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to place these hotspot markers in every place where there is conflict, where there's a battle. Then you're going to go ahead and resolve each of these battles based on turn order, one at a time. You do have multiple battle boards, so if it's a bigger game, you can conduct multiple battles at the same time. Now next, you have combat operations. Now during combat operations, of course, you move all your units to a battle board. Now you have sides, either the Axis side or the Allies side. And what you can do is you can actually choose stances. For instance, infantry, you can choose to have it on a defensive or an offensive stance. And that means with its defensive stance, it only is going to roll 1 die for each infantry, but it's going to take 2 hits to kill. If, however, you put it in an offensive stance, it'll roll 2 die, but it only takes 1 hit to kill. You can also do similar things with your tanks and your artillery, but there you're actually saying, are they anti-air or are they anti-land? And depending on what they do, again, you're going to have options for, do you roll more dice for the air, for land, how are they harder to hit or not. You do the same thing in the air. You go ahead and can say, are your air units attacking the ground or are they attacking other air units? Naval units can do the same things. They can pick particular stances. For instance, the cruisers, they can actually be escorts, meaning they can take hits for battleships and carriers. The very first thing you do is the air battle. Essentially, what you do is you add up all of the dice you're getting for everything firing at your enemy's air units. You mark then on the side of the board exactly how many die you're going to roll. You can roll up to a maximum of 30, and you're always going to roll in batches of 10, meaning one side rolls 10, the other side rolls 10, one side rolls 10, the other sside. However many you've got, that's kind of how you go back and forth. Now, your hits are scored depending on the colors you roll. So in the air, you go ahead, you roll, and if you're attacking other air units, if you get green, you're moving that guy off into green, or the red for the bombers. However, if you roll whites, you can kill anything that's been a casualty, that's been wounded. You can destroy it. And if you roll black, it's wild. You can hit anything with it. Now, you proceed then to the surface phase, either the ships or the land units. Now, here you do something called force advantage. Essentially, if one side has combined arms and the other side doesn't, then the side that doesn't gets a kind of a force advantage, the penalty, meaning they don't get a roll. Their blacks mean nothing and their whites mean nothing, whereas the side with the force advantage, their blacks and whites do roll and they count. You can destroy more units that way. Now, of course, you can only conquer new territories with land units, and every unit that is destroyed goes onto your nation's casualty list, so they pile up. You actually earn more and more casualties as you have battles, and you have some of these big battles, you're going to have very high casualties on your casualty list, and that's important because that's going to come into play later in the game. Phase 5 is the kind of refit deploy phase. Essentially, you land all your planes. You put little tokens on your planes reminding you you've got to move them back to land because they can't just hover over places you've just conquered, and they can't hover over sea, so you got to move them back to their landing zones. And then, of course, you go ahead and deploy units. Any units that you've built in the last turn, you can deploy them then in their factories. And then, of course, you can also reorganize commands. You can go ahead and say, well, I've got a stack of 8 here. Maybe I'll make 2 stacks of 4, or a stack of 1 and stack of 7. Or you can combine. If you've got multiple stacks, smaller stacks, you can combine them. You do have a stack limit of 8 per stack, but you can have any number of commands in a specific zone. Now, Phase 6 is morale. Essentially what's going to happen is you're going to look at all the casualties you take, and you're going to add them up. And each casualty is worth so many points. Like, infantry and artillery are worth like 2 points each. I think fighters and tanks are like 4, but then you get to like battleships, which are worth like 20. So you add up all of the points for everything that has died, has been a casualty, and then you look at that total number against a chart, and that tells you how many stress points you're going to get that turn. You place those stress points on your national flag, and you will have an opportunity if you have won medals. For instance, during combat, if you conquer an enemy territory, you can get a medal. And it's also going to give the enemy stress. If they lose a territory with a certain territory point value, they will gain stress for that. You can spend medals. You can also produce consumer goods, more on that later, to essentially take away stress, to kind of work on the stress. However, if ever your stress, you get a number of stress tokens that is equal to your stress threshold, your morale threshold, then you actually have something really bad happen. You move one space on the morale board at the center of the game board. So this center represents kind of your homeland and your national population. So the first time you take one of those kind of morale penalties in kind of your homeland zone there, you're just going to have to pay out resources. But as the game gets worse, you're going to lose your ability to move things by rail and port advantage, which can help you as well. You're going to eventually get to things like you lose 3 of your orders on your chart. Your supply lines, it means you can only write 6 instead of the 9. You're going to have complete economic collapse. You don't get resources, and you're also going to have just mass desertions. You can't count on your forces, and by that point, you've pretty much lost. So it's very important that you keep an eye on your morale and you make sure your civilian home front is happy. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen to you in your war effort. Now, finally, you have production. Now, you note on your dry erase board or your pad, you're going to have spots where you kind of mark what your starting resources are. Now, in the global game, and only in the global game, you can also trade with neutrals. And there are certain rules with trading with neutrals, but on a certain basis of a certain kind of scale basis, you can trade some resources for another. You always usually have a lot of the OSRs, so that's kind of what you're going to trade with to get oil and iron if you need it. But you're going to go ahead and trade and get those resources into your economy. Now, when you actually get units, you're going to be looking, okay, an infantry just cost me 2 OSRs. That's not bad. But if I want to buy a tank, that's like, an oil, 2 iron, and an OSR. You want to buy fighters, it's going to be more oil, more iron, more OSRs, and get like a battleship. It's going to be very costly. So you got to make sure you've got the oil, the iron, and the OSRs to pay for it. And you go ahead, you mark that out. When you figure out how much you've got, if you've got any left over, you can keep that, bank it for the next round. Now, for 5 resources, you can also buy consumer goods. Now, consumer goods, like I say, they're going to act a lot like metals. You can essentially pay them to get rid of stress. So it's a pretty big investment. Now, you can also, I think if you spend 5 metals and a combination of 5 metals or 5 consumer goods, I think you can actually move back on the homeland track, which can be very helpful for you as well. Finally, you take those new units you just purchased and you put them on the board. You put them on the board, you put a little token on the top of them saying they're under construction. They don't have a command on top of them, so you can't order them around, and they are there until the next phase. Now, if ever somebody in a subsequent combat phase actually moves into one of your areas, they can actually conquer those units and take them over and use them themselves. Now, however, I should point out, you can only build on territories that have the factories, and the number of smokestacks is the same as kind of their territory resource value, and that is the maximum number of units. I think like India's got a factory value of 5, meaning you can only build a total of 5 units out of India during the production phase. Now, players go around and around. They continually do these phases over and over again. You do a number of phases, and of course, as you're battling your way through Europe and Africa and the Pacific, you are increasingly going to find that morale track having more and more penalties for one or more nations, and they may be getting closer and closer to the brink of economic collapse. Now, that's critical. But also, too, you are trying to get certain objectives. The Allies, for instance, in the global game, are trying to conquer Germany and Japan. The Axis are trying to conquer 2 capitals. They're trying to capture Britain, Moscow, or the eastern United States. Whoever can meet their objectives will win War Room. All right, so that is just a very, very brief overview of how you play the game. Ton more going on here, of course. You've got things like convoy raids. You've got strategic bombing. You've got just a whole lot more going on here, and yet this is a very, very surprisingly easy to learn game. and very easy to learn. It's not, there's a lot going on, but it's not what I would call a very, very complicated game. It's not a complex game. It's a simple game with a lot of choices. It's a simple system. It's one of those games that's very easy to learn, but very hard to deal with the strategic choices. Interesting, hard in an interesting way. So, a couple of thoughts on this game. First of all, one thing, you're kind of going to compare this, of course, to Axis and Allies. You kind of have to. It's a very, in a way, it's the next evolution of Axis and Allies. It's designed by Larry Harris, who, of course, is the great designer of Axis and Allies. So it's that evolution in the game system, and it shows. It shows. It's very reminiscent. And the fact of the matter is, there's almost that default in your brain thinking in Axis and Allies terms, and you really can't, because there's a lot of different and new and interesting things that happen here. For instance, in Axis and Allies, every region you take over just has a resource value. You get that number of war production, right? But here, the resources are those different things: oil, iron, OSRs. And that is very interesting, meaning there are certain parts of the board that are critical. You know, that North Africa chain is critical for Germany. Middle East, you know, is really helpful to the British. The Dutch East Indies, incredibly, incredibly important to the Japanese. There's only two neutrals you can trade with, and the Germans don't have easy access to trade with Arabia, and they do with Venezuela. But of course, there's some rules. They have to have Navy in the area as well. So it's very interesting. So it makes those kind of oil productions key, and it makes them kind of choke points in the game, and it's important. And you kind of can't take things for granted. Like in Axis and Allies, virtually every version, the Germans could afford to lose North Africa. Here, you don't want to lose North Africa. So that's one thing that's very important to remember about this game. Oil is very important, and it's cool that you've got those different kinds of resources. I always thought that'd be kind of a fun way to do Axis and Allies if you actually had regions that had certain kinds of resources. Does it very well here. Something else I'm a big fan of here is I like the fact that it's simultaneous play. Now, again, there's a turn order because you got to resolve things. For instance, if somebody moves first and you want to move units out, your units get pinned. You have to leave at least an equal number of units there before you can move them out. So there's that system of where everything's happening at the same time. And there's almost a sense of where you're writing the orders, you're kind of conferring with your allies, you're writing the orders, you're working together, you're revealing them at the same time. That feels very much like diplomacy. In a way, this game kind of almost feels like a mashup of Axis and Allies and diplomacy. There's a strong diplomacy element here. Back in the day, I played and loved diplomacy, so I'm kind of excited to see that kind of system and mechanic at play here. It's very smart, very well done here. And it's just fun, because, again, it keeps you engaged throughout. It's not, okay, now it's his turn, I gotta wait for him. Okay, now it's her turn. Gotta wait for his turn. No, it's. I mean, there's a little bit of downtime. Sometimes we get a lot of battles, and you're not fighting a particular battle. A little bit of sitting back, but not much. I mean, really, you are engaged virtually this whole game. You are doing something virtually this whole game. So that is very, very cool. You can have a game this big, this expansive, with this many options for this many people, and you are engaged virtually the whole game. I cannot tell you how much I like that. That right there is like, wow. Blows my mind that they can make a game this big, this many choices, and everybody's engaged throughout. Awesome. Love that, love that, love that. I really like the combat system here, because it's not just a battle board. It's choices. You've got choices throughout combat. Do I want to take an offensive stance? Do I want to hold that land? I realize I'm not going to be rolling as many die, but I'm going to be harder to kill. Do I want to do that? Or do I just need to just punch through this as fast as I can and just be reckless? Just move through that and be reckless. And that gives you the options to do that. You couldn't really do that in Axis and Allies. It was just a numbers game. Roll and die was just a numbers game in Axis and Allies. Here, there are choices. And how do I want to commit my air units? Do I want to fight the other air units? Do I want to go for land? What's more important to me? What matters here? Do I want my cruisers to escort my capital ships? You know, it's really well done combat, and the consequences of combat. Because when you lose those guys, there's consequences. So you're always conscious of that. I freaking love combat. And then, of course, what I think is one of the greatest parts of this game, that morale system. You are, at the beginning of the game, you can afford to take on stress. You're not too worried about it. But as your casualties begin mounting, you realize this is going to be a major, major problem unless you're smart about it, unless you're really making an effort to keep the tiger at bay, so to speak, unless you are really fully prepared to invest in some of those consumer goods and really try to keep your stress levels down. it's so smart and it's so well done, and it's a great way to play the game. In fact, a lot of times you're not going to get to the end of the game in the sense of the capitals are being captured so much as one or more nations are just on the point where they're going to collapse and they're not going to come back from it, and that can be kind of a way to look at victory as well. So really, really like those aspects of the game. In fact, in the games I've played, we've that's kind of where we've played it to is a country's just not coming back from being so far gone. I got some criticisms of the game. First of all, it's a long game. It's a very long game. Now, I say criticism because I don't mind long games personally. You know me, TI4. I've been talking about years. TI4 is my favorite game, and TI4 is a long, long game. But it is I don't mind a long game as long as I'm having fun and as long as I'm engaged. I like games that go on hours and hours and hours. I can really invest in a game like that. And so I don't mind that. But I realize and I recognize a lot of people don't have the time to do that. I don't have a family. So I've got the time to do that. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't have the time to play a game like this. So that's going to be a factor. If you can't play a game once in a while that's going to last you 8+ hours, 6 at a minimum, 5 or 6 at a minimum, this probably is not going to work for you. For me, I mention that because it's a big factor in the game. Not by any means a deal breaker for me personally, but for a lot of people it will be. Second criticism I've got is the base game. The retail on it's I think about $240, and then you want to buy the jumbo pack expansion, which is really cool because you get the dry erase markers, you get the staves that you can actually push things along, which you kind of feel like you're Churchill in the war room there. You get some other goodies. That's like another $100. You get the jumbo map. It's like another $100 or something like that. So you're looking like $350 or something all in, and that's expensive. And that's one of those things where you're kind of doing the devil's arithmetic here, and you're thinking to yourself, I could get 10 other really good games for the price of this game, and do I want to? Right? Do I want to do that, or do I want to get this big one? And really, that's a question you have to ask yourself. It's an expensive game. And I was fortunate that the good people at Nightingale Games sent me a review copy, and I didn't have to make that choice. But I realize there's a lot of people out there that are going to have to deal with that. And a lot of people don't have the disposable income that they'd like for a thing like this. And so, that's a factor I've got to mention there as well. It's an expensive game. But let me kind of put this all, with all of these factors, everything I like about the game and these caveats I've got about the game, let me just kind of put this all into perspective and just say, first and foremost, I freaking love this game. It is amazing. This is just so good and so well done. So the production on it's amazing. The gameplay it's fantastic. It's just fantastic. I read the rules and I thought, I saw this game on Kickstarter. I thought it looked like a lot of fun. And then I thought it might be a little too complicated for me. It's not. I read the rules before I played it, and I thought, this looks like this could be a really good game. It looks like it could be a really good game. And when I actually played it, it exceeded my expectations. And a lot of that is because that you're invested the entire game. That really blows me away. So really, really liked it. So, as I said, this is kind of the next step, the next evolution of Axis and Allies. Now, I've said this 100 times, ladies and gentlemen. If you've watched the show, I'm currently working on my PhD in history, working on military history, World War II. I'm writing on American generalship in World War II. And the reason I got here is because of Axis and Allies. I played Axis and Allies like nothing when I was a kid. When I was 12 years old, I looked at that map. I saw spring of 1942, how far the Germans had advanced, and I thought to myself, how did they nearly won? The Germans nearly won. How did they get so far? And then I remember thinking to myself, how did we stop them? And that has set me on this course that took me to get my master's degree, researching Nazi Germany and their war effort, and the Soviet Union, their war effort. I studied in Berlin, and now I'm here in Texas working on my PhD on this subject because I'm fascinated from it, and it all goes back to Axis and Allies. So I guess, thank you very much, Mr. Larry Harris. You set me on my career path. This, to me, has killed Axis and Allies. I think I'll probably hang on to my World War I's because there's a dearth of good World War I games, in my opinion. And I'll probably hang on to my Axis and Allies and Zombies just because that's kooky and that's fun and I like it. But I think all my other Axis and Allies games, Anniversary, the Europe and Pacific, I think I'm going to sell those or give them to friends or something because I'm never going to play them again. Not with War Room. War Room has displaced that. It's the best of certainly strategic World War II games, not just Axis and Allies, but I'm thinking of Triumph and Tragedy from GMT Games, which was a very fun game. I really like, and that's got a cool diplomatic aspect to it. But honestly, I don't think I'll play that again. I don't think I'm going to play that game again with War Room. It's the best strategic World War game, best of the Axis and Allies games I play, and I'm going to go ahead and take it further. It's the best World War II themed game I've ever played, and I love World War II theme. For my top 10 of 2019, if I had played this one first, this would have been number one. This would have been my number one of 2019. I played Undaunted Normandy, which was my number one, which is a great World War II game, deck builder, but it's a very different kind of game. That was my number one. Well, this would have beat that. This would be my top game of 2019. So best strategic World War II game, just best general World War II game. I am going to take this further. This is my favorite war game of all time. This is my new favorite war game of all time. I cannot think of another war game I've enjoyed as much as this one. I did recently my top 10 favorite historical war games of all time, and my number one was Frederick from Rio Grande Games, which is a great 7 Years War game. Really like that. This one I like better. This is my new favorite war game of all time. Now, friends, I played this game twice now. Okay, I played the global game and I played the Pacific scenario, and I'm eager to play it again. Just I'm chomping at the bit to play it again. And I got to tell you, I'm going to go take this further. War Room is now, after 2 plays, I'm pretty confident in saying War Room is my new favorite game of all time. This is the best board game I've ever played. That is to say, and my criteria is fun. How much fun do I have? I've had more fun with this than any other board game I've ever played. And I know what you're thinking. Cody, but what about TI4? You love TI4. You've told us you love TI4. TI3 was my favorite game when I started The Discriminating Gamer in 2014, and for years before that. And then when they came out with TI4 in 2017, that was my favorite game. Until now. And I'll tell you why. Again, like TI4, this is a long game. But this one, like I say, keeps you invested throughout. There's a lot of downtime in TI4. It comes back to the end. There's fun stuff that's happening, and it does a good job of kind of moving along TI4 and keeping you invested. But it doesn't hold a candle to the way this game keeps you invested throughout. This game does it so much better. So much so that in a 3-player game, I begrudged the moments I had to go to the bathroom because I didn't want to miss anything, even when I wasn't rolling die or something like that. But that was the only time I could get away without inconveniencing everybody else. I love this game. This is my new favorite board game. It's the most fun I've ever had playing a board game. I don't know what else can I say. So with all that in mind, friends, you've got to make the decision if it's worth it for you. But for my 2 cents, if you can afford it, if you can find the time, even once or twice a year, to play it, buy it.
Hey, Cody here, the Discriminating Gamer. I'm just editing my review for War Room, and a couple other things I wanted to say about it. I just played my 3rd game today, another global game, and it was fantastic. I love this game. Did absolutely nothing to change my opinion of it. Can't wait to play it again. Can't wait to play it soon. Fantastic game. I just did want to say that the good people at Nightingale Games have come out with a short game variant. How that works is you go ahead and after 6 rounds, add up your points. You score points, or you get points rather, the further you are along the homeland track, the bad track where things start happening. So at the end of 6 rounds, whichever side, the Axis or the Allies, has the highest score based on that track, they lose the game. So you want to keep your stress levels low. You want to keep out of those bad places.
Thank you very much for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if you are indeed interested in World War II, like I am, here's a few books that will help to answer some of those questions about just how the Allies won World War II. The Second World Wars, How the First Global Struggle Was Fought and Won by Victor Davis Hanson. Why the Allies Won by Richard Overy. Russia's War by Richard Overy. Engineers of Victory by Paul Kennedy. The Liberation Trilogy by Rick Atkinson. The Storm of War by Andrew Roberts. These books and more are available in your local library.
Please somebody help me on my feet again. And I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I've been dying.
Lauren.